Indeed you are. So let's move on to a topic that's near and dear to your heart as an Iowan. Do you support the use of ethanol as part of the renewable energy solution?
Yes.
Okay. Well, then you're no doubt familiar with the ethanol industry's reliance on natural gas to operate their distilleries. Do you know how much natural gas is necessary to produce ethanol in support of our renewable energy efforts?
You know, I don't know the specific numbers, but I also know that there are some innovations and advancements in the production of ethanol which might potentially get us away from an over-reliance on natural gas.
And let me tell you, because I just do happen to know
Good.
how much. Okay.
I'll learn.
It takes about 28 billion cubic feet of natural gas to produce 1 billion gallons of ethanol. In fact, some of the industry sources that I talked to have said last year alone, the ethanol industry used 1 trillion cubic feet of natural gas to produce the ethanol in the U.S. for last year. Obviously, the Waxman-Markey bill is going to drive up the cost of natural gas, putting ethanol even further away from being economically viable, which creates a further spiral saying in order to make a viable ethanol industry, we're going to have to subsidize it even more. So it seems to me that we're moving the target away from where we need to be going instead of closer.
Well, I mean, that doesn't take into consideration what's done with the allocations or the allowances and the resources from those allotments, or if you auction off the allowances. It also doesn't take into consideration efforts underway currently within the ethanol industry to become far more efficient in terms of energy use, and it doesn't take into consideration new technologies that may potentially get us away from utilizing energy or new energy, or being able to recycle from the production process, using the energy from the production process to continue in sort of a continuous cycle. So this is not static. That's the issue here. I mean, we're talking about discussion points where it's not a static world. It is a changing world. It is an innovative world. And, you know, I hope that as you consider this, as you look at this, as you fashion this, as you frame it, that there's at least a recognition of the innovation side of the equation, that we're just not going to stay where we are. We're going to improve. We're going to get better. We're going to be more efficient. We're going to be smarter about what we do.
And Mr. Chairman, I couldn't agree with you more. I'm a big believer in innovation, but I err on the side of private market innovation to meet goals that are set by government, rather than government telling private business how they're going to get there. But I do appreciate your remarks. Thank you so much. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And it's amazing to have Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission even coming out against this bill. You'd think that there would be deference to states that already regulate these industries. Mr. English, it's nice to meet you, and I want you to know that there are 11 rural electrics in Wyoming, that they cover 60% of the area, and 40% of the residential customers in Wyoming are served by rural electric co-ops, and so I'm really grateful that you're here this evening.
The president of our association is from Wyoming.
And
nationally.
And a dear, wonderful constituent of mine, so thank you for that.
We got a nitrogen plant in Wyoming just for
now you're just buttering me up. I did want to mention that here's an example of the kind of costs that they estimate they're going to incur. One of our rural co-ops that serves my state estimated that under this legislation it will cost its customers alone $17.5 million by 2012 more, $31 million by 2022, and $59 million by 2030. Now, that's with less than 168,000 rural cooperative customers total in Wyoming. And this is just the estimate of one of those 11 co-ops that serve Wyoming. Would you say those estimates are the exception or the rule for the kind of rural co-op customers that you're talking to?
Well, obviously, it's going to vary from state to state and region to region, and even within the state, it'll vary. But I think you're going to find an awful lot of numbers similar to that all across the country, to be honest about it.
Well, I'm hearing that from other rural electric co-ops as well. So you confirmed what I suspected. You also mentioned that the emissions levels that are in this bill that are would have to be reached by 2020 is extremely ambitious. How would we get there? Have you talked to some of your providers about if they had to meet that standard, how can they get there?
It's not going to be easy. I did mention natural gas. I think a lot of our members would have to convert. Natural gas doesn't contain carbon. It wouldn't be that we would necessarily want to go down that road because it becomes more volatile as far as price is concerned. It's less dependable. Obviously, it's very disruptive to folks in the fertilizer business and a lot of other businesses around this country. That's not something we'd choose to do. I don't think most people understand that for baseload generation or even for peaking, if you start using natural gas, you'll have a huge amount of consumption. We found some new natural gas fields since 1970, and I'm very pleased to say that those predictions by the government back in 1978 were wrong. But at this particular point, if you start using it for baseload generation for electric power, and that's probably what we're going to be driven to in the short term over the next 10 years, then it's going to have a huge impact. That takes the massive amount of gas that would be required for that. I don't think it's been calculated by anybody yet.
Well, and we have some studies that show that as you have to ramp down wind energy when it quits blowing, and then ramp up natural gas power to meet that change in load, that it actually emits more carbon than if you had run that natural gas plant flat out, because you're of the inefficiencies of having to ramp up so quickly to get a replacement base load for that wind source. So it's got some bugs in it.
It's challenging.
It is challenging. Thanks. Mr. West, question for you as well. You testified that this cap and trade proposal likely would force the domestic fertilizer industry overseas to countries that have no carbon reduction policies in place. So they'll be producing fertilizer. So will the American farmer quit using fertilizer, or will they just buy fertilizer that's produced overseas?
No, they're buying it now. We import about 55% of the nitrogen that we consume here in the United States.
So we're going to send the jobs overseas, we're going to send the plants overseas, we're going to send the tax revenue overseas, and then send dollars overseas to buy product that we're producing in the United States now, at least to the tune of 45% of our production.
And we're going to probably buy that from areas of the country with lower gas prices, and that's the Middle East, Russia, Venezuela. That's where we bring it in now. I've got members, I got producers, importers, wholesalers, and retailers that do that. They go in the world market and buy it. And I think last year when we saw that run up in fertilizer prices, it was because of the demand in the world and the struggle that those guys were having bringing product to the United States.
Well, I can tell you I also serve on the Natural Resources Committee, and we had a gentleman come in and testify that if the United States cut its carbon emissions to zero, and Europe did and Japan did, and China, Russia, and India go on as planned, that we'll have no impact on global climate anyway.
It's true.
Thank you. Appreciate your testimony.
The gentlewoman from Wyoming is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I neglected to mention earlier that I have an opening statement that I would like to submit for the record. And
without objection.
Thank you. And I would like to add my compliments to those of you who have stayed with us this afternoon. I'd like to ask that Mr. Stallman, without ag offsets, do you believe this bill amounts to the equivalent of a huge cost increase to the American farmer and rancher?
Yes, absolutely.
Anyone else have any different response to that? Thank you. I will assume that means that you uniformly feel that way, and of course I do too. And I wanted to mention also that this morning the Wyoming Stock Growers Association joined the list of fellow ranchers and farmers around the country that are opposed to this bill and see only increases in their costs of operation as opposed to real benefits to them, and particularly so for those of us who have livestock producers who graze on public lands. And I have a question regarding that. Mr. Stallman, can you talk to us a little bit about why western states with large federal lands would have a limited opportunity to use offsets?
Well, grazing on public lands, I doubt that a structure would be in place like there is for a landowner to create a long-term program that would allow for offsets, not to mention the fact that a lot of western lands, it would probably be limited opportunities for sequestration to start with, just because the forage load is very light compared to areas that have more rainfall, and the western areas don't really have enough rainfall to grow a lot of forage or create a lot of plant mass, which would sequester the carbon.
Thank you. And I'd like to ask Mr. Johnson, how would you describe the difference between a carbon credit, as you envision it, and a derivative? And I'm getting to my point is this. You know, we've seen in the financial markets the creation of financial products that didn't exist 10 years ago, things like credit default swaps and collateralized mortgage obligations that were taken to a different level than we previously saw. What is to protect the American consumer by way of the utilities and entities that will have to buy these carbon credits from the creation of an artificial financial product like a derivative, like a credit default swap, that went horribly awry and now has cost the American consumer billions of dollars by way of the TARP program?
You know, actually that same issue could potentially be an issue in any market. And so I presume that if this committee is hoping to weigh in with changes to the bill that is currently under consideration, that'd be one of the things you might weigh in on. I would point out that a carbon credit offset is more like a bushel of wheat than it is like a derivative. That, in fact, by that I mean what you are selling is essentially a commodity. It's undifferentiated. It is a ton is a ton is a ton. It doesn't matter. A ton of CO2, whether it's in North Dakota or Oklahoma, you take it out of the atmosphere, the science suggests that it has the same impact on the climate. And so it's much more like a commodity than it is like some, you know, the credit default swaps, the derivatives, et cetera, et cetera. And so to that point, if you are concerned about that sort of market shenanigans, as I detect from the tone of your question, you ought to prevent those sorts of actions. And I have read enough about what the chairman of the committee has been saying to believe that he has that concern pretty deeply. And so it certainly could apply here like it does anywhere else in any other commodity market.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. I share our chairman's concern. And I might ask Mr. Yoder, with regard to very small ethanol plants, let's say, around the country, I know there's a threshold below which the EPA is not expected to get involved in regulation in this bill. However, there is an opportunity for emitters of, I think, 25,000 metric tons to be regulated by the EPA, and that is a fairly small threshold. A small ethanol plant could be regulated under that standard. Do you have the same concern that I do?
No, it's true. I don't know whether it's 20,000 or 25,000. It's something like that that could be regulated. But there is some technologies that are being developed now. I know in my own state, Greenville, Ohio, they're actually coming up with a program where they're actually sequestering that carbon that's captured from the ethanol plant below the ground and deep in the ground in the city of Greenville. So there's other possibilities that are working on in Ohio. There's also a company called Univenture that's actually taking some of those greenhouse gases, that CO2, capturing it and putting it into long tubes of buildings and growing algae and using it up completely. So technology, as the Secretary said, is going to be a big component in this. There will be some subject to those regulations, but we just have to make sure technology keeps up with that.
Well, gentlemen, I want to thank you. My time is up, but I share you've educated me on a number of things, and I'm deeply grateful. Thank you.